Tim Tollefson. How's it going, buddy?
It's going well. Glad to see you again.
You too, man. I apologize for my technical troubles here trying to get our podcast started, but
Wait, is
good
this
to
one gonna is this one gonna be on YouTube also?
yes, it is,
Oh
and you
man,
look
I
so
forgot my
good.
blush and I should have showered.
Man, you look so good always, and yeah, you're making it difficult for me to yeah, look at myself here on the screen because that coif on top of your head
You,
is always proud. So
you do not look a day over 36.
yes, I know. Well, we'll talk about aging here later in our conversation because I think it's relevant to both of us right now in our careers, but we'll save that for a little bit later. But welcome back, man. It's great to have you, and always, a major fan of yours, big follower of your career, and feel like we have a ton to talk about. You've been quite active, both competitively recently at Way Too Cool, but also it's been dynamic times, the personal and career front, and so we're going to dive into all of it. But I was thinking about the best place to start, and I figure we basically just go back to the last time we talked, which was right before Western States 2021, about 9 months ago. I figure we start there. Let's talk about the race at Western States. You were in a great spot mentally and physically before the race. At least that's what I remember from our podcast. And you were in a perfect place competitively, sort of through Forest Hill when things kind of unraveled a bit on Cal Street. So give us the quick recap from Western States, because I'm not sure I've heard you give a good long form synopsis of what went down there.
Oofta. Yeah, I don't think I have actually publicly really given one. Yeah, States was a mixed bag for me personally. I mean, it's hard to be disappointed with a fifth place finish at Western States. That I'm proud of that. But I think when I really reflect on it and just diving back into the experience itself, I really was not proud of my effort there because I gave far from my best on the day, and I learned a lot from it. And I would have hoped that being 7 years into this sport, I could have avoided some of those pitfalls, but I guess you're never above it. So it was a great learning experience, but objectively, it's probably one of my worst performances in my career. I'm just very proud that I did stick it out on the day because it gives me an opportunity to come back this next year. And really, obviously, all races deserve that of ourselves, but especially a race like States. A bit of a tangent, just so not even explaining the race, but I attended the lottery in December in person. And that was the first in-person lottery I've been at. And that one, like, I got chills watching the people get their names called and running up on stage. And it really just reinforced how special of an opportunity it is as an elite to be at States, where, I mean, we've earned the right in a lot of events to show up on the line based on things that you've done. And I think, high level sport, that's warranted. But it's easy to take those opportunities for granted. And I definitely have been, guilty of that in my career but like watching these people that have been waiting 3, 4, 8 years to get into States, and then they finally do, like, I was choking up. And it just made me realize, like, this next year and every other opportunity I've ever have to line up at States, like, I will not like take that for granted again.
Yeah.
And I think it's all about like just giving my best on that day. And because I didn't do that in 2021, it's something that like really stung. But as we talked on the podcast leading up to it, I was in a better mental space than I had been in a while, but I think I still was. A lot of pieces of the puzzle were floating around, and I could say the things I wanted to like be living, but I wasn't quite living what I felt I wanted. And so then when you throw in, variables like heat and like your effort and all these other things, like I just resorted back into bad coping mechanisms or mechanics. And it, I essentially, I had the longest pity party I've ever had in a race, where on Cal Street, Cal 2, I sat down in the aid station and I'm tired, obviously. You're 70 something miles in, but I just completely catered mentally. Like I was ready to drop out. I wanted, the aid station volunteers to pull me. Bless their hearts, they didn't. And they made me continue on because they could tell I had my wits and I physically was capable. but I'm not proud of how I handled myself like earlier on, but I'm proud of the finish. I got it done. And like I said, I have another opportunity to go back this year, and I'm really excited to go in there with even better intentions than I had in the past. And I think that's what really excites me.
So what was it though? Do you feel like you really struggled with? Was it a combination of heat and maybe poor execution?
I'd say the two biggest things were one, nutritionally. Um, I don't have a great relationship with food and nutrition in general. And in an event where you're riding such a fine line because of the heat, you can't get away with a poor strategy. And so that early on bit me. And then things as that starts to kind of that sets the trap for later things to kind of just go off the rails. And so that was a big thing. And then also, I think a lot of my perspective or intent around the race were just kind of still not like I didn't have a good grasp on why I was really doing what I was doing. I still hung up on some insecurities and driven out of maybe some deficits personally, where feeling that, hey, I could validate myself or my worth through a performance here. And you end up realizing at some point in life that is a false belief, and it's flawed. And like I catastrophize things in my mind on the day. So like as I started having a race that wasn't going as well as I had dreamt of or knew that I was capable of, I kind of just catastrophizing and thought, well, like it's all lost. Like, and I say that when I'm in third place or fourth place, but it felt like my day was over. And so I think it just highlighted how mentally vulnerable I was. And I wasn't, in that headspace to give my best on the day. Like I was trying to, let's say be the best, not my best. And I think there's a very important, like delineation between those two. And I just wasn't able to reconcile or remediate the issues that were popping up as quickly. And some of that goes into obviously the caloric deficiency that I built. So
Dude, it feels like you've put a lot of thought into this. I mean, it's super thoughtful answer, and I think opens up a lot of interesting doors. But
and we'll probably talk about it, but I like in that last podcast I'd mentioned like I'd been in therapy for some stuff, and so basically I've continued like weekly therapy for 2 years, and none of it has been sports oriented or like sports psych or performance based. But I'm starting to realize that like through just shedding a lot of personal insecurities or things that I've dealt with and doubled down on because I didn't know how to really cope with it, that like those were preventing me from doing like unlocking my best self or like self-actualization or whatever you want to term it. I feel like that stuff was just a major barrier. And when you're constantly battling yourself internally on that, sure, you can have flashes in the pan of success, and I've had that in my career, but I haven't been able to replicate as much or as frequently as I'd like to being a competitor because I'm just in my own way. Like I've had to continue to learn to get over myself, I guess.
Wow.
But also I feel like there's been this paradigm shift in my philosophy is like, the impermanence and imperfection and incompleteness of life. And that last part, like I'm never going to achieve the state like, damn, I got it. Like now I just know like next race and next race are going to be perfect. It's a work in progress, and granting yourself the grace to roll with it.
Yeah. Wow, man, we're getting philosophical already. This is beautiful. I just read the book, The Infinite Game, and it's all about that, about how oftentimes in life and sport and business, you like are just waiting until like you feel like you've made it, like you've got there and you can just relax. And the book's all about how it's an infinite game. You never get there. And so it's all about process. It's just another way of sort of driving that point home of process. So you made it to the finish line, and I know it was a massively important thing for you to do to get there. And on the track during your finish line interview, you said something like that it was one of your proudest performances, even though it was well below your expectations and your potential on the course. Reflect on that pride and maybe how you're feeling about getting to the finish line in tough circumstances now 9 months later?
Ooh, crossing that line, it was, I think it just was so meaningful because despite having like that big low in the middle and giving up on myself, really, like I proved to myself that like all was not lost and you can turn things around at any moment. And essentially, I mean, something I've also learned in therapy is like rock bottom is where you decide to stop digging. It's kind of like you don't have to hit like a theoretical bottom. And like in that moment on at Cal 2, I decided to stop digging myself a hole and started moving forward.
Just
And
let go of the competitive aspirations.
yeah, and it's like, hey, I'm just gonna,
Yeah.
this is where I'm at today, and I know I have more in me. And obviously the way I finished that course with the amount of like, I guess, speed, it highlighted that I just didn't tap my potential earlier on. Like,
Dude, you were flying.
and so, and that was something I really will pull from that is that, it's, and that's, again, it's a work in progress where I've had, 30, 40 ultras in my career, and I've had, these learning opportunities, but you forget them. And it's, but yeah, I think it meant a lot because one, I had so much family and like so many friends out there supporting me. States or Auburn is almost a hometown race for me. And so having all those people that support me there at the finish line, like nieces and nephews, like when it's almost 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, it was really special. And to know that, like, I was doing it for something more than just myself, which again, we all can get in our own way, and like, it's kind of like, get over yourself, and then you can realize, how special these moments are and what you're capable of. So I think the fact that I did eventually turn it around was something I was very proud of.
Yeah. It's so funny. We're talking about it like it was a complete failure. You still finished 5th place at Western States.
I know.
But, I mean,
and
it's,
I think that, like, for me, if we stripped the objective time, like, place out, I would have labeled it more as a failure, if you will, because I didn't give my best on the day. And I think that's what we all should be striving for. And that's where we all could win, regardless of place. Like, if you literally give your best, and because I know I didn't, that was a hard thing to swallow. But yeah, I mean, it was far from a failure, but I guess that is just how you define failure, or, reframe success, essentially.
it's just one moment in the infinite game. So
Yeah.
let's fast forward to UTMB. You and I saw each other in Chamonix before the race, and it was so clear that you were compromised. And we were walking through town as you and Lindsay were moving to a different hotel. And Lindsay and I were both like, Tim, you don't need to start this race. You probably shouldn't start this race. You had said that you hadn't had a pain-free run since before Western States. Yet you still chose to stand at that start line. And of course, predictably, the race was kind of a disaster. And you said afterwards that you just didn't have the courage to not start the race, which strikes me as just like a really powerful, profound sort of lesson or message from that experience. Reflect on the UTMB experience and where your mindset was at, and why you felt like you needed to be at that start line.
I needed to be at that start line out of like an emotional or psychological deficit, essentially. It was insecurity that was driving me to that start line. Because for all the reasons you listed, there was no objective reason for me to have started that race. Nothing had gone well. And it wasn't like, oh, my workouts just didn't go. I was injured. Like, I shouldn't have been doing it. But I think out of insecurity of feeling that, I had just come off of a relatively unimpressive race, like goal race in the summer. Like, sponsors had paid for my trip. All of these external variables were leading into that sense of feeling that I had to do something for others, where the best thing for myself would have been to have pulled the plug. But I wasn't emotionally strong enough to make that decision. I wasn't at a place where I was, I guess, confident enough to do that. And so, and UTMB especially, I have a storied past with it now. And I've rode some of the highest highs you could at that event, and had some pretty deep lows. And the last couple outings out there, I have teetered more on that psychological state where I probably shouldn't have been there. But again, I feel like there's so much inertia and momentum behind me going there that it's expected, and it's kind of like you get caught up in the hoopla and like, okay, maybe I give myself a chance, but if I'm really being honest with myself, definitely the last two outings there, I should not have even started.
You're just hoping for a miracle.
You're just, and it's like swinging it for the fences where, I mean, I don't think anyone should really do that to themselves, because it sets you up for a big fall, especially if you're driven into that state because of some sort of emotional, kind of deficit or, insecurity. Then you're going to deal with the fallout even worse and probably double down on stuff. So
what are your feelings about the race at this point, as perhaps the most successful American to ever do the event, but who has also had a couple high profile recent failures? What are your feelings about UTMB, your position in its history, and how you hope it fits into your future career?
Oh, yeah. UTMB. I guess I have mixed feelings about it. After 2017, that year that you were in the race, and we shared quite a few miles until you're a bit of a snafu with some gloves and gear. But I think I know I proved to myself in 2017 that I have what it takes to win that race, and I'm capable of it. Now, obviously in 2017, Francois and Killian ran out of their minds, and it didn't happen. And then in the following year, 2018, I was poised. Probably I felt stronger in my prep and ready to go after it. And I took a bad fall and cut my leg open. And in hindsight, talking to some people, I'm actually, I can't say thankful, because if I could have won in 2018, I would have taken a win. It would have been awesome. But I am grateful, actually, in a sense, and it's strange to say that I didn't win in 2018, because I was so deep into a lot of these, disordered like thought patterns and actions that I hadn't even begun to try and unpack any personal stuff, that I would have doubled down on so many of these unhealthy patterns with a win, and it would have set me off on another path just to, I think it would have driven me into a deeper area that I wasn't ready to handle with emotionally. It would have skyrocketed me into an area where insecurities would have really, they've been pretty deep in my life, but they would have gotten even deeper. Those roots would have been hard to I feel like dig out eventually. So from that aspect, it's kind of a good thing that I didn't, have the success outwardly over the last couple of years there. But what I've realized is I need to just be strong enough personally to not start unless I'm in a good physical and mental space. And especially just in the last 4 months, and we'll talk about Way Too Cool a little bit. I feel like I'm getting closer to that space where I will be able to get out of my own way and be able to go in with intentions that are right for me. And some of that is also getting over this false sense of humility of saying or realizing it's okay to say I want to win UTMB. It's okay for me to say I want to win states. But that's not the most important thing. But, we train with that intent. But I think that for a long time, I was at odds with that, thinking if I say that, it's somehow a bad thing. And I kind of had an internal struggle over that component. And so I feel like there's just been a lot of aspects that have not been in alignment. But now realizing that if I go into UTMB and I am in a good mental space, I know that I can win that race. And at some point, I think I will. But if this year states is the focus, if my body's not recovered, I'm not even going to try it.
We'll get to that in a second.
But
so maybe to push you a little bit, when you talk about disordered thoughts, right? Is that sort of something where you're attaching meaning to what a victory or a defeat means for you personally? Is that what you mean by sort of the significance that you're putting on these races and maybe the unhealthy patterns in your mind that are attached to them?
Yeah, there's definitely a component of that. It's pretty layered, and I'll keep it superficial at the moment because I'm not quite ready to like definitely dive in there. But there's a strong component of that. Like you said earlier, you're gonna you'll achieve some state if you accomplish something. And there's that very strong association between my personal worth or place in society or my personal relationships is going to be validated somehow through this accomplishment. And as you said, that doesn't exist. Like you can't ever completely validate or get somewhere with this next thing. There's always going to be another thing to accomplish. And in our heads, we build it up as though it could be this enlightening or aha moment, but it's not as big as we make it out to be.
The infinite game.
As I need to look at this book. I'm not familiar with that. But and Lindsay very lovingly and humorously will say, she's like, "You're not that special," like she says it with the best intents, but it's like sometimes you need to hear that. It's like and especially if like I'm not someone that's very open. Like I'm very outwardly charismatic on social media because I have to, but I can play that persona. But my natural instinct is very, very internal and closed off, and I have a hard time opening up with like actual conversations or anything below surface level stuff with people. Sure. So then you get stuck in your head. You build things up to be much bigger than they are, and when left unchecked, your head can become like the worst echo chamber. Mm-hmm. And things can really take root, and seeds of doubt or insecurity or whatever it is can really kind of overpower your ability to even think rationally or kind of rank and rate things in a real sense. So a lot of stuff I've done throughout therapy is just one, giving myself an emotional toolkit to work with, so I even know what I'm kind of experiencing, and learning to sit with feelings, because that's another thing. And I think a lot of us, you get uncomfortable feelings and we learn maladapted ways to suppress those. Yeah. And it can come through a multitude of different forms, through physical addictions or,
substance addiction,
like a lot of things. And it's because we're trying to suppress emotion. You don't want to feel what you're feeling. And it's like, okay, like I need to actually like sit back and let this sink, like set in. And what is funny is like, I've realized some of this internal work, it's harder than UTMB's course. It's harder than any ultra marathon like I've tackled. Like, it's uncomfortable, it's painful, it's a struggle, but it's also rewarding because it translates into every domain of my life. Like, personal relationships are being strengthened, like having conversations with loved ones I wish I had done 20 years ago. And again, it's a long work in progress, but it excites me because I start to see how like I show up better in my personal life and with the relationships. And then selfishly, I know it will translate into better physical like athletic performances. And that's where I get stoked. It's like, I just turned 37, but I honestly think I could have my best years ahead in the sport of ultra running.
Yes, dude. Wow.
And that excites me because I love running, but I've had a very difficult relationship with running over my entire life, where in a lot of ways, I've told Mario, my coach, this is like, it's strange to say, but without running, I may have actually had a healthier life. And that's an odd thing to say, but
because you're maybe using it as a maladaptive way to suppress emotion.
Without a doubt. Wow. Like a lot of different things. And unfortunately, I think in the sport or endurance sports in general, that's not uncommon.
Oh yeah.
But we can easily celebrate we can easily mask these things through like, oh, you're so determined, or you're so gritty. Like, I wish I had half or an ounce of the amount of dedication you have. It's like, well, do you know what's driving some of these people, or myself included? And like, I think it's easy for us to celebrate unhealthy patterns in our sport. And I hope that's something that narrative changes, because it's the people that are struggling. It's painful, it's isolating, it's lonely. Unfortunately, I've actually, lost friends to things, it can lead to very dark places. And it's not to get dark in this podcast, but it's just something I hope that like those narratives continue to change and it doesn't become as taboo, and we can like be vocal about things, because I'm personally just seeing how much it has shifted like my life. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. That's
Yeah.
really a beautiful answer. And I've been in therapy myself recently, and I have been dealing with a lot of stress and preoccupied deeply about something where basically I just had a big decision that I needed to make. And without going into too much detail, my intuition was so strongly on one side of this decision matrix, but I was just so scared to align myself with that intuition and do what in my bones I knew was right. Maybe reflect on intuition a little bit, because I'm sure at UTMB last year you had a deep intuition of like, I shouldn't be here, but I'm here because of the fact that, I need to impress my sponsors, or I need to live up to the 2 podium performances that I've had here. I need to avenge the DNFs. Reflect on maybe how you've been able to get more in touch with your intuition.
That's
Or,
a,
or if it's relevant to you. I mean, I'm
no,
I'm
I
just
think
bringing
it
it up.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Personally, I feel that I haven't been able to trust my intuition. Maybe you acknowledge it, but I think with any sort of like addictive personality or like someone that might struggle with like different kind of components, you can easily, like, you have to relearn to trust your intuition. Like you have to relearn to trust yourself. Like for a long time, I've used a lot of external or internal, like basically metrics or gauges to try to monitor or mediate things that were maladapted, and like basically like having to let those go is really hard, like especially if you're someone that might ruminate on things. And it's and then to like re-educate yourself on what not normal, but like what a healthy relationship with certain things are is hard. So like you feel like you're starting without like a built up intuition. But like with UTMB specifically, like, I mean, I knew that I shouldn't have done it. So my intuition there was saying, don't do it. But again, I wasn't strong enough to listen to that, because there are all these other things that feel that, it's, in my mind, it was like, it's better to start and then like DNF, because then you could be like, hey, I gave it a shot, and hide behind that almost. Where I think there is just that.
It takes the courage to listen to the intuition.
Yeah, where it's not courageous to start a race when you're injured. It's not courageous to finish a race when you're injured. DNF at all costs, or no DNFs at all costs, I think is a terrible, kind of philosophy to have in our sport. There are a lot of great reasons to drop out of a race. Like if it's harmful to you, your loved ones, others, like we should not be above ourselves to pull the plug or not start. And so I think, like, yeah, my intuition was telling me no in that sense, and I definitely wasn't listening to it because the voices in my head were too loud.
Yeah. It was like me before I got on the plane to the Grand Raid.
Yes.
Just hoping for a miracle, knowing deep down that my intuition was just screaming, man, just stay home and focus on getting.
But some of that is, you have to learn to get over yourself or your ego. Yeah, you have to, or make peace with your ego, and recognize ego isn't a bad thing, but it can lead us to do things that aren't the best for ourselves or others.
Yeah. Well, my therapist asked me what was a very simple and profound question, which was, have you had trouble listening to your intuition in life? And it made me think, like, honestly, no, I haven't. But recently there's been a few notable examples where I've done something totally contrary to a very strong internal intuition. And so with this thing that was preoccupying me so deeply for the last couple of months, I trusted my intuition, made the decision that I needed to, and feel a lot better as a result.
That's
based on the
good.
intuition. So anyway, so catch us up from there. You didn't race after UTMB, and you started 2022 with a triumphant victory at Way Too Cool, which we'll talk about in a sec. I'm sure there was some temptation after UTMB to sort of put something on the calendar. There's always that instinct to like chase, I've got to avenge this DNF. I've got to put something on the calendar. And especially after a unsatisfying, though solid 5th place performance at Western States. What have you been up to personally and professionally since UTMB. What was the fall and turn of the new year like for Tim Tollefson?
So there was huge temptation for all those reasons you said. And that really goes back to that root of like, okay, what's driving you to do these things? You know, and it was, you know, all of the wrong reasons, honestly. You know, it wasn't in my best interest to jump back into something. So the fall, what was really helpful was I spent more time just basically being my support for Lindsay as she was preparing for CIM in December, and being available for workouts on her, like in her build up, hopping into a few other races with some friends, which was really fun just to basically, yeah, get away from everything being about me and you know, maybe kind of helping others in my close circle. So that was really fun. Was able to pace Lindsay at CIM to her second best marathon ever, almost a PR, you know, after almost 8 years away from this, like basically kind of running her best races. Mm-hmm. And then also helped our buddy Fernando in a half marathon. And I mean, actually that half marathon was interesting because I had not done any real preparatory work for it. And my intention on that race was just to help him as long as I could. And, you know, so there was no expectations on myself. And throughout that race, I surprised myself on finishing much faster than I thought I would, but it was because I was basically serving someone else. And that was kind of a neat little thing where it was like, wow, I'm not doing this for me. And I tapped into potential that was there, but I would have probably had a governor on myself had I been doing it for myself, which was kind of a really neat revelatory experience, I think. Cool. And then but then, you know, I'm not above. December rolls around, January, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to sign up for Black Canyons. Like, I don't need a golden ticket, but I need to, like, you know, I need to feed my ego. I need to be relevant. You know, I need to, you know, keep my sponsors happy. Like, there's that fear of, okay, I haven't really raced since June. And although, you know, my main sponsor, HOKA, has been very supportive in our, you know, I guess this is my 6th year with them now. Like, they've never, you know, done anything to, you know, that would indicate otherwise, that they're unhappy with my place in the sport, because I am such like an anxious and nervous person, and I don't have a great line of communication, or I haven't been open about, like, you know, talking these things through with, you know, my key managers. I build up narratives in my head that if I don't do this, like, I'm on the chopping block, you know, and in reality, I know that's not true, but because I have been too nervous to even broach those conversations, I build up a scenario in my head where it leads me to do things I shouldn't be doing. But ultimately, thankfully, this time I realized that Black Canyons, I was doing it for all of the wrong reasons, and doing 100K in February in the desert was, even if it went well, it wasn't good for my overall 2022 season. So I pulled the plug. And actually, this was probably, I'd say, one of the most pivotal points in my career. My coach and I, Mario, we then spent basically the final 6 weeks before we were way too cool with a completely novel approach for training than I've ever done. And it mirrored with more of a professional side that we'll talk to eventually. But I basically backed off everything. Like, I backed off volume, I backed off intensity, I backed off my work professional life. And a lot of that intent was so that I had energy and time, and basically just, I was able to focus on the things that I've been trying to do in therapy and others, and let those sink in, and prioritize myself, and not prioritize the running, not prioritize all these external variables, but really just honestly take time for me. And that allowed more growth, I think, in like 6 weeks than I've experienced in a long time, because it's like, you know, you put in the same input, you're going to get the same output. And like, I've been in that cycle where it's like, okay, I'm putting in this, I'm getting that out. It's like, how can you be frustrated? You're not changing.
Nothing changes.
And so I really need to make that change, but change is scary. Like, I mean, for a lot of reasons. Yeah. And for me, like, again, if you deal with anxiety and other, like it can lead you to stay on an unhealthy path because you're so worried about the future or guilting over the past that you're not going to make change. But that just is going to lead you down to a predictable path. And so, like, you know, in this winter, let's say end of January, early or throughout February, we backed off. Like I was running less mileage than I would for a race. I only did one workout per week. That workout wasn't even like anything to write home about necessarily, but one thing I did to marry this kind of new mindset and philosophy was I literally stopped looking at my watch. I stopped looking at metrics on social media like Strava, where in the past, I'm not like a lot of us, you get hung up on like being worried more about its engagement with others than what the workout or the effort meant to yourself. And so it's like, you could have an amazing run that like, is like putting money in the bank, like to have a great performance. But if for whatever reason, like it didn't get the feedback that you were building up in your head, like, I mean, personally, that could, start to erode my confidence. And I mean, that goes to a lot of that, like, fear of other people's opinions or like needing that external validation of what you're doing to feel like you're on the right path. So I basically stripped myself of that stuff, try to like, cleanse all of those variables that weren't helping, and went into Way Too Cool. And Mario and I talked about it, like, I was prepared to take an L. Like, I'm like, hey, I don't need to win this, but our goal on this day is like, you're not going to stop pushing and you're going to get the most out of yourself on that day. And that was my intent. And, obviously I felt like I could win, but I didn't need to win. And that's the first time I think I've actually honestly felt like accepted that like, hey, I'm just going to go in here. Everything I can do on the day, if that gets me fourth place, that gets me fourth place, but I'll be proud of the effort. So, yeah, I don't know. That was kind of the circuitous way of how I approached Way Too Cool.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe we should talk about the career stuff before coming back to Way Too Cool, because I think maybe it'll feed into that conversation a little bit more. And I love the way that you set it up and talked about Mario and your guys' changing approach, but we just touched on the scary nature of change, right? And you and I spoke on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and we're both going through similar times in our lives, in our careers. We've both made respective leaps of faith. What can you share with the listeners on the career front? I'm sure people would love to hear about the specifics as well as the thought process behind it.
Sure. So, and yeah, really my true professional life is a physical therapist here in Mammoth Lakes, which I've been doing for a decade, and work at our sports center and, serving our local and visiting professional recreational communities. And, it's something I've done, for 10 years full time. And, also it took 8 years of university to get to that point. And so, but also for a long time, I've known that like the amount of time and energy I put into that has also been starving me of my true potential in running and some of these other, basically kind of this creative side of me that I've wanted to lean into. But when you have, and I think this is true for a lot of people, like you go down a path and there's so much inertia or, kind of investment behind what you're doing, it's really hard to then pivot and change direction. Like the PT world, this has been 18 years of my life, basically. Like, and to suddenly say, I'm gonna, back off of a great career that's serving my community to pursue something else is scary. Like, I mean, you're leaving stability, you're leaving, basically an identity to then like jump onto this other track. But I knew for a long time, this other track is something I really wanted to like pursue. And because there's this internal struggle, it led to even more anxiety, more fear of failure, more like doubling down on unhealthy patterns where I wasn't doing anything great. Like, I felt like I was just barely holding everything together. And like, then basically just leading to like burnout. But so this other path, like as outside of just running professionally, it's really like I've been on the back, or like kind of my third hustle career has been slowly developing an event here in Mammoth, like an ultra marathon and trail racing circuit that I wanted to be able to share my love of trail running the Eastern Sierra, Mammoth Lakes with other people. And, it's something that I've known is like it's long overdue. I think it's a perfect place to be doing it. But I just had so many other things going on. I couldn't dedicate time to it. So yeah, I'm backing off the PT world, and I'm just per diem now at the hospital. So I am still there in some capacity to, kind of continue to contribute to our community, but I'm going to be contributing in a much bit different and bigger way where, I'm now going full into this race development, the Mammoth Trail Fest. And we're going to be having our first ever event this fall. And it's exciting because, trail running and running have changed my life, and I want to be able to provide a platform for people to experience that same thing. And Mammoth Lakes is a perfect place for it. But fear of failure was immense. Taking that in, I've basically been trying to step away from the hospital for 2 years, and for a number of reasons, I kept pulling myself back in, or I'd get pulled back in, and there's like you're constantly dealing with that internal struggle.
There's fear to take a leap of faith. So maybe going back to what we just talked about, change is scary, change is risky. You're putting your own name, reputation on the line to try and start this race event. Mammoth is, of course, one of the greatest places in the world to trail run, and it deserves this type of event that you're envisioning. But of course, it involves risk and it's scary. So maybe to ask you the question that my therapist asked me, where's your intuition on it? It seems that probably you were feeling a strong intuition of I want to do this race event. And to do that, there's going to have to be hard decisions that are made. And that is breaking the inertia of this long time physical therapy career. Is that a correct characterization of maybe your internal conversation?
Definitely. And even my therapist would say, okay, what's the worst that could happen? It's are you going to go bankrupt? Is Lindsay going to leave you? Is, all these, and it's no. Okay. I have no reason that I shouldn't pursue this creative outlet. But I think it's that, overcoming the fear of potential failure and just taking a chance. But my heart has always said, this is the right thing to do. And it's the thing I really want to do. And even though I wasn't doing it, I was working full time, I was running full time. And then in every spare moment, I was pouring energy into this other thing. And it's okay, well, you're doing that. You're not making any money. You're not but you continue to spend all of your waking hours doing that. Why aren't you prioritizing that? Because if you really put your energy into it, what could it become? So yeah, my intuition is telling me that it's something I want to do. And then I started to realize, there was a lot of external interest in what I was starting to build, and it validated my belief that this was something not only that I wanted to do, but it could be successful. But it's still scary. It's, when you leave that traditional track, and I think it's very true for going into a creative outlet, especially if you're coming out of any traditional, let's call it, vocational practice, especially leaving a medical model to then pursue a creative outlet, that's a major 180.
Yeah, it's a totally different part of your brain that you're using, probably. That's probably why it's so fun. I totally identify with everything you just said. It's it's there was a lot of inertia behind sort of what I was doing, and eventually you just have to be all in. You have to, and there's no other way for things to be successful. And I deal with endless amounts of insecurity and second guessing of the path that I'm on. But then, you do get that external validation or the feedback from people who kind of give you hope that you're not crazy and that you are heading in the right direction. Last time you were on the podcast, we talked about the Mammoth Trail Fest, just, for a quick moment, I think at the end. And so maybe fill in any gaps there, maybe to provide the vision for what is going to be hopefully the inaugural event this year.
So we are going to launch a 3-day running festival, the Trail Running Fest, September 22nd through the 25th here in Mammoth Lakes. 3 different distances. Friday, we're going to have a 26K, Saturday, a 50K, and Sunday, a hill climb up to the world famous Dragon's Back climb to the summit of Mammoth Mountain, which I know you put in some laps on there in your hard rock build. And then also, a lot of, so this event has been incubating since 2016. When I did UTMB my first time, the CEO of Mammoth Mountain followed, all night long my exploits over there. And I got back and we were hanging out and he said, why don't we have something like that in Mammoth? And I said, Why don't we? You tell
You're
me.
in charge, bro.
No, right?
You're the boss.
Come on. But then it just started to build each year. He's like, man, this is amazing. And we have a venue, we should do this. But then it's like, I'm stretched so thin with all my different, vocations, it just wasn't going to happen for me. So this year, I guess it's really my vision is to try and share so many things that I've loved about European global racing that I've had opportunities to do, but in California with like a serious California flair for people that may never be able to or don't want to travel abroad. And I think it's going to be obviously we're going to have, amazing competitive races, but I want it to be really about the experience where we can come, we can connect, we can share stories. Gonna utilize, you and your fantastic team of, trying to help convey, spread the gospel of trail running and why it's so amazing, and basically just be a platform for people to, do that. And part of me is also like kind of that redefining success. Like in my head, okay, if I don't have 10,000 people in year one, it's a failure. It's like, no. If we have 15 people show up and they absolutely love it, fall in love with trail running and they go off and they like spread that with other people, that was a success,
Yeah.
so it's kind of reframing like what I think a failure would be. But I just want to be able to share, this trail running with as many people as possible. And then also, have it where you come in and whether you have that amazing race or you DNF, like you get so much more out of the weekend because it wasn't just your event, like your specific race. Like you can listen to Dylan talk, or you can connect with some people and watch an inspiring film, like all these really cool things that make a weekend so much more about community than the actual race itself is what I hope to build here. And partnering with people that believe in the same thing, undoubtedly I know it will become that. It's just going to, take time, but I'm stoked for year one, just for people to come and share this with whoever does. I think it's going to be a great weekend. So,
yeah. So quickly, where can people learn more so that I can include it in the show notes and drive some people to the website?
mammothtrailfest.com is where is our domain for everything. So on there, you can find stuff about the individual races, the event weekend, and a link to registration, which is through Ultra Sign Up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations, man. Like I know this is something that's been on your mind for years, and it does take risk. It takes commitment, and it takes unrelenting hard work. It never stops. And like I said, it needs to exist and you're the person to do it. So,
and I just feel like, and kind of back to the beginning of the conversation, like having an appreciation for what other people have gone through, like, through the state's lottery, this has really given me an appreciation for all of the events you and I have been to around the globe and how much work has gone into those things, where it's easy to take that for granted. But now seeing how the sausage is made has been really rewarding and humbling. And it's kind of like, hey, I've had these incredible experiences. Like it's time to share that with others, pay it forward. And, it's a lot of work. I mean, permitting took us years to basically lock down, but it's all going to be worth it in the long run.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Trust me, I'm going to be a race director for the first time about 1 week from now for the Gorge Waterfalls 100K and 50K. And it's given me a renewed appreciation and a understanding of the challenges of putting on an event. And we were very lucky to have a great partner in Daybreak Racing and Jeremy Long to do a lot of the heavy lifting. But shout out to all the race directors out there. It's seriously hard work. So let's circle back to Way Too Cool now. We spoke on the phone a couple of weeks ago. You mentioned that you and Mario had sort of adjusted things. You turned the volume down, you turned the intensity down, and opened up just this extra space and extra energy that ultimately resulted in a victory at Way Too Cool. Maybe give us the blow by blow. It wasn't until later in the race until you actually took the lead, right? How did it go? How did it go down?
Yeah, it was just an awesome 3 hours of racing. And I was telling Lindsay, that's what I miss most the deeper I get into ultras is sometimes, the longer races. It's more of like managing all these variables and like, okay, let's make sure I can get to the end, where a faster 50K, like Way Too Cool, it's, a bare knuckle boxing match out there, like full throttle. It's that F1 style of racing where it's just like, if anything can go wrong, like you're out, like you can't recover. So yeah, I went in and I felt confident that like I'd done enough training, you know, to have a really solid day. But I also knew that like with the field, like Darren Thomas, he's an incredible young athlete. And, you know, there was some speedsters in there. So I kind of, you know, started to try and just tap into a little more like, hey, let's strategy wise, like what might I be able to do to, you know, kind of give myself a good day. And so some of that was like, well, I'm just going to take it out hard because I know I have strength. And maybe some of these other guys don't. So my intent was like, let's just hit the gas right out of the gates. And so like,
that's not your style, man.
It's not.
We run a few races with you.
But I'm like, hey, I'll just set the trap. And I knew I was going to ride the line, but I also have so many lifetime miles and strength, so much strength behind me that I feel like I could endure more than maybe some of these others. So like first 2 miles, way too cool. It's downhill on a road. You know, we opened it pretty quick and not ridiculous, but you know, we're running 5:20 pace, like at the beginning of a 50K. And then pretty quickly though, like I thought I might string out the field and maybe 7 guys passed me at like mile 2. And I just thought, okay, this is gonna be a tough one, you know? And I only recognized one of them, Darren, and the other 6, I'm thinking, this like, I don't know how this is going to shake out, but like, I'm just going to like trust it. And so I kept, you know, just kind of staying in. Like I said earlier, my mantra was push. Like I just said, hey, I'm going to get the most out of myself on this day, regardless of where I am. And so when it was getting hard, I just was like, push, you know, when my legs were going to give up, push, you know, so I never gave myself the opportunity to back off. But by mile 18, I was up into 4th place. And I was at that point, I kind of had accepted I might finish 4th place today because they were nowhere in sight. But that goes back to what we were saying, like, you know, my intent, like if my intent was to get the most out of myself on that day and it was 4th place, I knew I would be proud of that. So like, I knew I could keep pushing. So I kept pushing, but going into alt, the aid station there, and now you're on the Western States course, which is really, really fun. I caught 3rd place at the aid station. I was like, okay, like I'm in 3rd place. Like, so I'm just going to keep pushing. And then I'm hammering. And then probably about mile 23, 24, like my calf muscles start to kind of quiver and almost cramp because we're going faster than I was tapping everything, like scraping the bottom of the well, basically from a fitness standpoint, because we hadn't done the prep that I normally would have wanted. But also that was kind of cool because it's like, hey, I'm tapping into this from the mental side, not from the physical side. But I didn't catch Darren until Goat Hill, which is mile 26. So I moved into 2nd place at mile 26. And then there's 1st place is not in sight, but I'm like, hey, I still have something in the tank. I can keep pushing. So I keep pushing. I hammer down this like rocky little descent, and then you intercept the States Trail again. And this final climb, there's a little rocky area right before you can see the quarry, and then you cross Highway 49, mile 93 of Western States. And so now in my head, I'm like reliving not only States, the 2010 Unbreakable, and I turn the corner, and here's 1st place, like stumbling up a little rocky climb. And I couldn't help but think like Jeff Rose, like catching Anton right before the highway. And so I passed him right before the highway. I come across the highway, and that was the first time that like people like relayed to the finish. Oh, Tim's in 1st now. And like, so everyone at the finish line, like my family, like what? Like, and so then I just hammered it home. But I mean, obviously winning is really great and ended up being like the 4th fastest time ever. But what I'm really proud of is that I just didn't give up on myself in that day. Like even when I conceded, hey, I'm probably in 4th place, I'm going to keep pushing. Where at States last year, when I was in 4th place and falling apart, or not even falling apart, like I saw people catching up, like I gave up where I could have kept pushing, like, and I didn't. So like, it's all about trying to replicate that moving forward, where I just want to keep getting the most out of myself and letting those external variables, you know, go. And I think that's when myself or anyone can be at our best, is if we have that as our intent. You know, you can have a lofty goal. You want to hit your Boston qualifier, you want to qualify for states, you want to, you know, win the race, set a course record. But when those things fall, like kind of go out the window, what else can you still do on the day? You know, like, and it's not like giving yourself, you know, contingency plans where you can give up on your ultimate goal, but it's more like stop trying to like, be the best and just be your best. And I think that was really what I was able to live at Way Too Cool this year. And so that's what I'm most proud of, that like, hey, I came out of that and it was like I unlocked a cheat code where it's like, if I can continue to cultivate this, what could I be capable of, in the coming races this year and beyond?
Wow.
Because it really feels like it's, and that's something where, but I also recognize how hard it is to replicate that. It's, because I could experience that
just when you feel like you've got it figured out, then
the
universe does a rug pull on you, and you have to learn
totally.
it all over again.
But
So
I think that's the impermanence of life, and it's like,
the infinite game. It's the infinite game.
Okay, I'm gonna have to write this down. Text me so I can read it.
So I mean, maybe talk about the feeling of satisfaction or maybe relief, right? Because obviously we talked about Western States. It was solid 5th place, though unsatisfactory, below your potential. UTMB was a disaster, admittedly, DNF. I'm sure, there's part of you that sort of starts to think about, man, maybe it's sort of coming closer to the end for me. My best days are maybe closer to the rear view mirror. What was the feeling like to actually, cross the finish line in first place again, having taken this new, mature, healthy mindset and, sort of like validating to yourself that you still had it?
It was really special. And we can be frank, Way Too Cool is not the biggest, most competitive 50K in the nation. It has some history. It's got history, and but it's not like,
Fourth fastest time ever is a big deal at that race.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the oldest races in the country that almost every fast person has ever run.
Yeah, I think I found myself, what also is neat is, it's basically a hometown race. My mom lives 10 minutes away. And so we had our family and some close friends go back to her house for brunch afterwards. And I found myself, I went into my bedroom and I just like closed the door and just like sat in silence and smiled. Like it just felt good. It was like, and I guess it was validation of the journey we're on right now is the path I want to be on. And yeah, winning helps inflate that a little bit. But I think even if I'd been 4th, because in that race, when I was 4th, I was like, I wasn't sad about that position because I knew I was giving everything I could in the moment. Yeah. And so I think I would have done the same thing. I probably would have gone to my mom's house, closed the door and smiled. And so that was it was just truly enjoyable. And so I think that was neat. And it also, I think, it got me excited for what could be coming up. Like we said, okay, what else is possible? But it's because I think my intention with these races moving forward is going to be really trying to deliver my best on those days.
Personal rather
totally.
But I think against somebody else.
Think that's where you can unlock your potential.
100%.
So it's funny. After UTMB, I went for a run with one of my best friends here in town, John. And I told him on this run, I was like, I don't know if I want to suffer anymore. I don't think I have it in me. Like I've done it for such a long time. I know what it takes. And in that moment in September, I was like, I was contemplating like, okay, like, I'm going to continue to ride out my contracts, but it's like, do I really want to be doing this anymore? Mm-hmm. But I think it's because that thought was tied to needing validation through the results.
Yep.
Where now I'm starting to really believe that my potential, like if I run to my potential, I don't think I can win Western States. Mm-hmm. I could win UTMB, but winning states or UTMB is not going to change me as a person. Yeah. And I think that's the critical piece that I've always missed, where it's like, oh, when I win this or that, then I've made it, then fill in the blank. But it's like, no, like I'm still going to be the same person. Like people are going to move on. Like it's not going to change my life and the way I used to think it would, but it's something I do care about. It's something I want to strive after. And I think having those big, scary goals are important in life because they drive you into doing some cool things. But it's starting to do it for the right reason, but also being okay with like, hey, I want to win these races, and I can say that, and that's not like it's something I should be, where it's like, oh, I'm being cocky, or I'm being, it's like, no, it's okay to say that. Like, you can say you want to do X. And so I think that was kind of a pivotal moment where, and the other thing is in the training for Way Too Cool, I had some 4-hour runs where time both took forever and was over within like a blink. It was like I had achieved that flow state, and objectively, like if you looked at my watch, nothing special, but like I actually enjoyed those time, like those hours out there where, leading into UTMB and so many of these other cycles I've had the last couple of years, they were not enjoyable. And that's where it's like, it feels like suffering.
Forcing it. Yeah.
It's not suffering if you're actually enjoying the process, but because I was always waiting for the end game to happen to validate some other thing, I couldn't live in the moment because you're always waiting, you're anxious about the future or guilting over the past. And so you can't get in the flow state. And so I think that was another thing where it's like, hey, and my therapist asked, she's like, when was the last time you enjoyed a run? And I sat there and I thought for a while, and I was like, it's kind of sad if running is so pivotal or like important in my life, and I can't come up with a date that I last actually enjoyed a run. It's like, I put in 500 to 1,000 hours in this sport, and it's like, you're not enjoying it. Like, why are you doing it? But it's kind of like in that build up to cool. I had so many enjoyable runs with Lindsay and and it was kind of like, oh, that's where you got to be, So that excited me. It's like, hey, it's not that I don't have an appetite to suffer anymore. I think I just I was viewing suffering as like, it wasn't enjoyable, where if you are potentially like tapping into that flow state, you're really capable of doing a lot. If that, I don't know. So it got me pretty psyched just to be like, hey, I think there's a lot left to do in the sport, or, in running in general.
So let's talk about aging now. This is the perfect time to do it.
Yeah.
When you won Way Too Cool, I sent you a text just basically saying, yes, dude, congrats. And you responded, old guys 1, young guns 0. You just turned 37. Today is my 36th birthday. I think about aging a lot, to be honest. Where's your head at as it relates to being a 37-year-old professional athlete?
It's interesting. I've always, in the last year, it's the first time in my life. So let's say I was 36 years old. First time ever I started thinking about that athletic mortality. Yeah. Because when you're in you're a teenager, you're in your 20s, even 30s, you just know that you can get better if you start tweaking things, or you get a little more consistency, or you're double down on some rehab, or it's like, oh, I'm always going to get better. That's just how it goes. Like year after year, I can get better. And so suddenly I realized, okay, no, that endpoint on my true genetic ceiling is actually approaching. And I think it kind of resonated with me that, okay, I'm not always going to have tomorrow, where I was always in that moment. It's like, okay, I can mess this up, and I'll go to UTMB next year. I'll go to UTMB next year. It's like, no, you're going to run out of next year's. And so I think that kind of really sunk in, that it's like, oh no, you do have this mortality as a competitive or pro runner. And so I think it kind of it was a little sad to acknowledge that. And then I'd say in the last year, as I really start to continue to work on that self-actualization, and realizing, hey, especially in a sport like ultra running, the wisdom plays so much more. Obviously you have to be consistent, you have to be healthy, you have to put in training. But I think about all the times I've lost to people that I feel like I should have on paper beat. It's like, okay, now let's flip it around. Who could I beat that on paper they should be beating me? And I think that that's possible through more of this mental side. And so I'm going into my 37th year feeling more hungry to see what I'm capable of, and knowing that I have a few more years to do this at the level I want to do it. And then taking inspiration from other friends in the track world, people like Sarah Hall, just crushing it at 38 years old, all these people that are starting to.
And D'Amato, isn't she's in her late 30s too, isn't she?
She is. Yep. Yeah. Got the American record. I don't know Kira, but it's pretty inspiring. And so I think that it excites me for the next couple of years. And then especially if you look at the 100 mile, it's like, man, if you have a healthy body, which is something, if we talk about the aging, like you have to prioritize, be a little more diligent with your prehab or your overall stability and strength stuff. Like, these are important things. Then there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to continue to compete. And that's actually interesting. 2017, my best year at UTMB, that was the last time I actually did like stability and strength work. Like, and then I just gave myself, like everyone does, all the excuses why I can't fit it in. And like, but it's like, you're a pro runner, you should be doing this. But then there's that like internal struggle of like being mad at yourself for not doing what you should have done, and then feeling like you didn't do everything. And so like, it's kind of like now in the last couple months, I've gotten back onto like those very basic hip and leg stability stuff. And it's like, oh, no wonder I feel a little better at the end of these runs. No wonder, like, things still hurt, but like you're just more powerful.
The wisdom of age. Like
I know. And as a 10-year therapist, like I'm sitting here saying that I don't do my stuff, but it's true. I mean, I'm human. That's the reality.
Of course, we all lack discipline sometimes. So.
Yeah.
Well said. And certainly, it's when we get into our mid-late 30s, you do start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, but you still got a lot of gas left in the tank. And as you said, wisdom is massively valuable in our sport. So God willing, you and I still have many great years ahead of us. So.
I mean, my first UTMB, Ludo won, and he was like,
what a beast. Grand Raid, he won this year. He's 47 years old. What an absolute animal.
So, I mean, you take guys like that.
He's going to be at Western States, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dang. So, so many great examples, men and women in our sport that do that.
Yeah. So let's talk about Western States. Way Too Cool is in the rear view. The crosshairs are now firmly on Palisades Tahoe, and a podium or cougar worthy performance there. I'm sure we don't need to talk about goals, but maybe just talk about what the next 90 days look like between now and arriving in Olympic Valley.
It's going to be just prepping myself more mentally than physically to be in a space that I know I can go deep. And I think it's just going to be continuing to work on all the same things I've been doing over the last 2 years, with a little more, I think probably just dedicated focus on stuff that like relates to Western States. And then I'm realizing, as I said at the beginning, last year I started having all these puzzle pieces that were floating around, and I felt like I was on the right path, which I was. But when you're deep in the canyons, literally, you need things to be automatic. You can't also then be trying to use your cognition to work through. It's almost like it has to be so habitual that like you're on autopilot, like, and like excellence is going to come out because you've practiced it so many times. So I think that's the continuation of what I'll do the next few months is just, dive into that work, because it's going to be a continual struggle, but I'm confident that I can, start replicating that with better frequency. And then I'm going to just spend some time out there on the west side. Like I said, my mom only lives about 10 minutes away from the track. And so I'll do some long training weekends or maybe weeks out there now that I have a more flexible schedule, and link up with some people. And that's another thing. I've been a terrible running partner for the last like 6 years. I never run with people, and that's more out of like insecurities. But I am going to link up with some people on the west side that live and train there, and I'm looking forward to those moments where I think it's just going to make the overall process enjoyable. Where as we talked about earlier, when you're so fixated on only the outcome, then you can't enjoy the process because you want the outcome to come. And then whether or not it goes well or poorly, you've missed that big bulk 98% of, the process. And so, I'm looking forward to leaning into that and including more community in that process. And, I guess basically just being okay with vulnerability.
What about competitively? I remember in our last podcast conversation, you said that you sort of had at some points in your career had an unhealthy relationship with racing because you felt like it put you in the spotlight, and that if you didn't perform, it compromised your confidence, especially just before an A race like Western States. Of course, you're just coming off of a great victory at Way Too Cool. Do you imagine yourself racing between now and the end of June?
Uh, I'm not sure yet. Kind of on the fence. I wanted to go to Gorge, but my dad's birthday is next week, and Lindsay has a race in Sacramento. So
Next year.
Yeah, next year. But I don't know. I guess I need to take a look at the calendar. Now that I'm starting to work through that relationship with competition better and realizing that, you know, things don't have to go perfect, then I'm more likely to do something, because it's an opportunity to prepare for that next thing where, you know, and I think that's, you know, part of the whole, you know, getting over the pursuit of perfection, where, you know, you don't have to win every single race to then have a good race. It's like, no, you know, that's really unrealistic. And so, I mean, even at Way Too Cool, it was kind of a neat little aha moment where when I was in fourth and these three guys were crushing it in front of me, I didn't view that as, man, I'm inferior at the moment because they're in front of me. I thought, they're showing me what's capable and they're these carrots I'm chasing. And it was like this like paradigm shift of like, oh, like, okay, like, but that's removing myself and like the potential like value I was going to get out of it, where in that moment I didn't have to win. I was just like inspired by what they were doing. It allowed me to perform at my best. So long way of saying maybe, but I don't really, I mean, it's also kind of hard. Like now that Canyons is at the end, or not at, but I'm not going to do 100K at the end of April. I don't need to. It's like, well, which races are there available? I think logistically we might run into some potential setbacks, but if something makes sense, I probably will race. But I think it's likely I'm just going to have a lot of big purposeful weekends and weeks throughout May and June to be ready for Palisades Tahoe.
Yes, yeah. And we hope to be there to capture the story. Maybe we should just tease our little project that we're working on before
heck yeah,
flying down.
Yeah.
So for our listeners here, Tim and I have been scheming up in collaboration with our good friend Ryan Thrower a film project following you in your pursuit of a awesome performance at Western States this year. So we need to connect after this recorded phone call here to talk about it in more detail. But for the listeners, you know, you'll be on the lookout for that. Drive to Survive meets trail running, hopefully, is what we're aiming for. So
I'm gonna roll up to the start line on a scooter.
Yes, like Lewis Hamilton. Yeah. Great, man. So what a fun conversation, man. I so appreciate you sort of coming back on the show. And, you know, as a fan and follower of yours, you know, I'm always rooting for you when you're on the start line. And I'm really just like, you're a wealth of knowledge at this point too. And you're so like, we all make mistakes in our career, and it's really refreshing to just hear you sort of reflect on those mistakes publicly and own mistakes and share the learnings from them. And, you know, this like, it's not always easy to sort of talk publicly about things that we're dealing with internally and things that are habitual since we're kids and cause us anxiety. And, you know, I've been there too. And I'm sure many people who are listening have been in the same boat. And yeah, I appreciate you coming back on the show.
Thanks for putting this together. And I, to that same point, I hope that at some point we start to see more ability to network or mentor other athletes in the sport, because I think there are so many men and women, you know, from every generation that have so much knowledge, but connecting that with the people that need it, I think is necessary. And so if there, maybe that's part of Freetrail, you got to like find a mentorship program. But like, I think it's so important because, you know, selfishly, if I had started to be privy to some of this information when I was a teenager, you know, and I won't get hung up on the what ifs, but, you know, what if, like, you know, what would things have looked differently, like even just personally? And I think it's a huge disservice if we don't do that for the incoming generation, because our sport's going to just continue this meteoric rise, and I'm excited to see where it goes. But I also hopefully learn from, you know, people can learn from us. I mean, I learned from a lot of the greats before us, just reading old blogs and stuff like that. Not enough, but, you know, it's I think it's a necessary thing to always pay that forward.
Yeah. All right, Tim. Well, I'll hit end on this record button, and we'll start talking about our video series. Thanks for
All
coming
right.
back.
Be sure to like, subscribe, smash that something
Smash that
button.
like button.
Yeah.